Hello everyone, a warm welcome to you all. Today we are going to study a very interesting, a very easy and enjoyable short story written by Ruskin Bond. The name of the story is A Face in the Dark. Before going any further, let me request you, please subscribe to my channel and hit the like button if you find my video useful. Let us first read about Ruskin Bond. Ruskin Bond, an Indian author of British descent, is a prolific writer whose works are popular with children and adults alike. Prolific means a highly productive writer. In the following story, writer Ruskin Bond relates a thrilling incident set among the picturesque hills around Shimla. Ruskin Bond's fascination with the paranormal finds expression in this macabre tale. Picturesque means beautiful to look at. Paranormal means that which cannot be explained through science, and macabre means disturbing or gruesome. So what happens in the story? Mr. Oliver, a school teacher, is on his way back to school late one night when he meets a strange young boy. The encounter fills him with terror and he takes to his heels. He takes to his heels means he runs away very fast, only to discover that there is no escape for him, means he cannot save himself now. Ruskin Bond makes skillful use of all the elements of a horror story, which are fear, suspense, surprise, and mystery, to explore humanity's collective fascination with the dark. So, human beings have always been fascinated with the dark. Human beings have always enjoyed listening to stories about ghosts and monsters and other things. Not only have they enjoyed listening to stories, there are many people who enjoy dabbling in these things. A Face in the Dark by Ruskin Bond. Mr. Oliver, an Anglo-Indian teacher, was returning to his school late one night on the outskirts of the hill station of Shimla. So Mr. Oliver's school was located on the outskirts of the hill station of Shimla, and he was an Anglo-Indian teacher. Anglo-Indian means that he was of mixed parentage. One of his parents was British and the other parent was Indian. Now some information about the school. From before Kipling's time, Kipling here refers to Rudyard Kipling, the writer of the Jungle Book. So from before Kipling's time, the school had been run on English public school lines, which means the school had been run in the same manner in which English public schools are run. Public schools in England means the elite schools. And the boys, most of them from wealthy Indian families, wore blazers, caps and ties. So the students who studied in Mr. Oliver's school were all from wealthy families. Life magazine is a very famous American publication. So Life magazine had once published a feature on India and had called this school the Eton of the East. Eton refers to Eton College. So Eton College is a very prestigious boarding school for boys. It is located in England. And the school in which Mr. Oliver used to teach was also the same kind of school, which is why it was called the Eton of the East. And Mr. Oliver had been teaching here for several years. The Shimla Bazaar, with its cinemas and restaurants, was about 3 miles from the school. And Mr. Oliver, a bachelor, usually strolled into the town in the evening, returning after dark when he would take a shortcut through the pine forest. So Mr. Oliver was a bachelor, which is why in the evenings he was free. So in order to pass the time and enjoy himself, he always used to go to the Shimla Bazaar. He would enjoy himself there in the cinemas and restaurants and then return after dark. So because it used to get dark, he always used to take a shortcut through the pine forest. When there was a strong wind, the pine trees made sad, eerie sounds that kept most people to the main road. So imagine when if you are walking through the forest at night and there is a strong wind blowing, at that time naturally the trees will make sad, eerie sounds. Eerie means really weird, peculiar, something that makes you nervous. So sad, eerie sounds used to come from the pine trees. because of which most people used to avoid taking that path. They used to keep to the main road. But Mr. Oliver was not a nervous or imaginative man. So Mr. Oliver was quite brave. He didn't have a nervous temperament. He never used to overthink anything. So he had no problems taking the shortcut through the pine forest. He carried a torch. So it's dark. He needs to see his way. So using common sense, he always used to carry a torch. And today what happened? On this day what happened? Its gleam, the batteries were running down, moved fitfully down the narrow forest path. So it was a narrow path in the forest, and because the batteries in his torch were running low, the light was not very bright. When its flickering light fell on the figure of a boy who was sitting alone on a rock, Mr. Oliver stopped. So the flickering light, the wavering light of the torch, suddenly, as he was shining the torch on the path, he saw that a boy was there. He was sitting alone on a rock. So immediately Mr. Oliver stopped because it was very strange. The boys were not supposed to be out after dark. "What are you doing out here, boy?" asked Mr. Oliver sharply, moving closer so that he could recognize the miscreant. Miscreant means the wrongdoer. So immediately he felt angry, thinking that why is the boy here? Because the boys are not supposed to be out after dark. But even as he approached the boy, Mr. Oliver sensed that something was wrong. The boy appeared to be crying. His head hung down, he held his face in his hands, and his body shook convulsively. So this boy was crying. Something was definitely wrong because although his head was hung down and you couldn't see his face, his body was shaking violently. It was a strange, soundless weeping, and Mr. Oliver felt distinctly uneasy. So there was something very strange because he was crying, his body was shaking, but there was no sound. So Mr. Oliver started feeling uneasy. "Well, what's the matter?" he asked, his anger giving way to concern. So initially he had been angry, but now he was concerned. "What are you crying for?" He wanted to help the boy. He wanted to find out what was the matter. But the boy would not answer or look up. His body continued to be racked with silent sobbing. So the boy kept on sobbing, that is, he kept on crying silently, and his body kept on shaking, but he did not look up. "Come on, boy, you shouldn't be out here at this hour. Tell me the trouble. Look up." The boy looked up. He took his hands from his face and looked up at his teacher. The light from Mr. Oliver's torch fell on the boy's face, if you could call it a face. So Mr. Oliver was shining the light on the face of the boy, and the moment the boy looked up, at that time he saw his face, if you could call it a face. Why could you not call it a face? Because it had no eyes, ears, nose, or mouth. It was just a round, smooth head with a school cap on top of it. So you would never have imagined such a thing. Imagine meeting somebody who doesn't have any facial features. And that's where the story should end. But for Mr. Oliver, it did not end there. So obviously the boy was something horrifying. And at that moment itself, the story should have ended. But there is a little more. The torch fell from his trembling hands. So he was so scared that he dropped the torch. His hands were trembling. He turned and scrambled down the path, running blindly through the trees and calling for help. So he didn't even see where he was going. He just ran as fast as he could and he started shouting for help. He was still running towards the school buildings when he saw a lantern swinging in the middle of the path. As he kept on running and running towards the school, suddenly he saw that in the middle of the path there is a lantern. The lantern is swinging in the middle of the path. Mr. Oliver stumbled up to the watchman, gasping for breath. So he was running so fast and he was running unsteadily. Somehow he managed to reach the watchman and he was panting heavily. He was gasping for breath. "So what is it, Sahib?" asked the watchman. "Has there been an accident? Why are you running?" So Mr. Oliver replied, "I saw something, something horrible. A boy weeping in the forest, and he had no face." So it is very strange. The watchman asked, "No face, Sahib?" Mr. Oliver replied, "No eyes, nose, mouth, nothing. So he had a head. but he had no facial features, nothing. Do you mean it was like this, Sahib? Asked the watchman and raised the lamp to his own face. The watchman had no eyes, no ears, no features at all, not even an eyebrow. So the watchman's face was also the same as the boy's face. And that's when the wind blew the lamp out. So the last sentence of the story, that is what is a very, very apt conclusion, because Ruskin Bond leaves the ending to our imagination. So when we read this, that the wind blew the lamp out, it could mean that that was the moment when Mr. Oliver died of fright. He might have got a heart attack. Or it could simply mean that indeed there was a strong wind which blew the lamp out, because of which there was total darkness. So what happened in that darkness, that is something that we have to imagine.